Jeff, you having a hard time reading your handwriting?
I'm having a hard time reading my handwriting.
Sorry, what'd you ask me?
That's all right.
I would wake up at midnight and raid their freezer for Jell-O pudding pops.
Hello and welcome, listeners. It's great to be with all of you for our Worth the Journey, a Worthington Schools podcast. My name is Angie Adrian, and I get to serve Worthington Schools as the Assistant Superintendent of Academics.
And I'm Jeff Maddox. I am the Director of Human Resources.
Together, we are your hosts for this podcast and appreciate you taking the time to hear the stories of those that we get to work alongside of in Worthington Schools. Worthington Schools is a district of about 11,000 students and 1,400 staff. We in Worthington Schools take a lot of pride in building strong relationships with others, which really impacts our culture. Culture makes people understand each other better, and if we understand each other better, it's definitely more fun to work together. Culture encompasses the shared values, the traditions, the diverse perspectives that shape the identity of our community. Our mission in Worthington Schools is to empower a community of learners who will change the world. In this podcast, we get to interview others who are already changing the world through the intentional efforts of storytelling. Storytelling triggers the brain, responses that affect both mental and physical makeups. Stories are proven to motivate and change minds. And I'm excited about today's story, Jeff.
This is going to be a fun one because she is going to be able to bring a lot of student stories to us, but stories to our community that, you know, when you drive past this building, a lot of our community members still probably go, I wonder what happens in that building. And for a very, very long time, Linworth has brought to us incredible stories because of the people who show up every day and impact the kids.
Absolutely. We really appreciate our listeners out there who are tuning in and listening to today's Worth the Journey podcast. And just as a reminder, you can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google, our school website, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tomorrow is State of the Schools.
The State of the Schools is strong.
It is strong. And you just mentioned Linworth. And we get to highlight a student from Linworth who is currently on her walkabout in Guatemala.
Yeah,
Walkabout.
Yeah.
Like, Jeff, we have students in Worthington Schools who are traveling, not just out of Worthington, but out of the country, because we have teachers and staff and administrators at Linworth who value bringing these kinds of opportunities to our kids. I can't imagine doing something like that when I'm in high school.
No. And you and I were both athletes in high school, right? So there was probably a level of confidence that was a little unrealistic in our own heads.
Absolutely.
But I could not imagine having the confidence as a high school student to say, hey, family, I'm going to walk away from you for, half of a year and I'm going to live in Guatemala.
Right. So see you later.
See ya. I'm out of here.
I'm going to go learn and I'm going to learn differently. Right. Like, I just can't imagine. Like, I think about myself as a high school student. We'd have sleepovers, right? You'd spend the night with someone, have sleepovers, the team would get together. And I was that kid that, I'd do all right until about midnight and everybody starts to go to sleep. And I'd sneak into the kitchen. And when I was in school, and I'm dating myself, but when I was in school, the phones were still hanging on the walls, right? We didn't have cell phones. And I would, my parents could probably most of the time expect this, but I would pick up the phone and call them and be like, okay, I'm ready for you to come pick me up.
And they're like,
I'll be outside the door. And because I didn't even like to stay overnight somewhere else.
yes.
Let alone Guatemala or
I enjoyed staying over and having sleepovers. I would wake up at midnight and raid their freezer for Jell-O pudding pops. That was my go-to sleepover snack back then, was the Jell-O pudding pops.
Okay,
I don't think they make those anymore.
No, those were good.
But those were
chocolate or vanilla.
Yes.
Both didn't matter. The swirl.
I did not discriminate against anything that was not healthy.
Maybe that'll be a rapid fire question at some point.
Exactly.
Bring it.
We know that a walkabout that we're going to get to talk about today is a tradition at Linworth. It's a tradition in Worthington Schools, and it takes a whole heck of a lot of courage from our students and a lot of work from our staff to help students find places to do their walkabouts. that meet their needs, right? That fit what they want to experience their senior year. So I'm excited to introduce our listeners to Jennifer Kubina, a teacher at Linworth Experiential and the leader of our Walkabout program. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hello.
It's good to have
Thanks
you.
for being here.
I'm really excited to be here.
Good.
Any opportunity to talk about Linworth or Walkabout, it's such a unique thing that we do over there. And I love telling the stories that happen, the learning that takes place outside of the classroom.
Well, let's get into it then. Let's get into it. Jennifer, before we get started talking specifically about Walkabout, tell us a little bit about you, your experiences in Worthington schools.
Sure.
Let the listeners know who you are and what you care about.
I've been teaching in Worthington schools this is my 24th year. I was hired in 2000 as a middle school teacher at KMS by Pam Van Horn. She actually called me in the beginning of the summer, and she's like, hey, Jen, I'm looking at your application here, and I think I'd like you to come in and interview with me. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she's like, wait a minute, do you already have a job? I just done my round of applications, and I actually did just accept a job at Hilliard Schools. And I was like, yeah, in Hilliard. And she's like, uh-oh, which middle school? And I told her which one. And she was like, actually, my son's going to be at the other middle school, so I won't be taking you away from him. So she recruited me over, and it was before that July 11th deadline.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I taught for 3 years at Kilbourne Middle School, ELA, and then the district experienced budget cuts and some staff changes at the end of my 3rd year, just when I was feeling like I'm getting pretty good at this. I can probably do this for, long term. And then I got notification by Pam that she wouldn't be able to have me back, but that they needed me to fill in a spot right over at Linworth. Now, that was pretty scary to me. I was a pretty mainstream teacher at the time and still pretty new. I went over and I met with Wayne Harvey, legendary teacher director Wayne Harvey, and he was like, this is where you're going to be, at least for the next year. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that. I actually don't know much about this place. But, here I am. 20 years later, I've been at Linworth the whole time and pretty much working in dual role at Linworth. I am an ELA teacher for the 9th graders at Linworth. And then the other part, basically half of my role is to place the kids on Walkabout. And, that first year, I wasn't so sure, but obviously something about the program, the community, the students, and the staff really, it was just so compelling. It was some neat stuff we were doing. And, 20 years later, here I am.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's amazing how things work out like that.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're probably disappointed that you have to leave KMS. Like you're worried, what's going to be next for me? And then you land and fall into Linworth. Now, did you start that first year, were you also director of Walkabout that first year, or were you all ELA?
So we actually have 2 staff members who work on the Walkabout program because we do value classroom teaching. Okay. We'd like to split our time. So at the time, they thought that I might be a good fit to do the Walkabout role because prior to teaching, I was actually in the business world for a little bit. I actually went back to get my teaching certification. And they thought, well, Jen might be good at making phone calls and reaching out to organizations and businesses because she sort of got that acumen as well. That first year I worked with Liz Sweet, also another legend.
Legendary Liz Sweet.
Yes,
Yeah.
She was an ELA teacher as well. And she also was the Walkabout coordinator. And she's like, well, why don't you teach the freshmen since, you kind of have that, you're used to teaching the 7th and 8th graders at KMS. And why don't you take on about 8 or so Walkabout students? That's like a nice entry level, number to give you. And yeah, so right away that first year, I had to learn what Walkabout was. I had to get to know the students who obviously had been there longer than I had at that point. And I had to figure out like how I could provide and create with them these learning opportunities all over the country and all over the world, even that first year.
When I was listening to your story, I was a young principal at Perry Middle School in the space when we were talking about reductions. And when you brought that story up, I remember Pam very clearly being crushed. I'll use that word to have to come and talk with you. And then fast forward this many years later, you were at KMS, you got moved.
Sure.
Over to Linworth. You stepped into a situation, you didn't really know anything about it, and you're talking very positively about it, which is cool just to hear that story. So we have talked about Linworth, and why don't you share just big picture? What is Linworth?
We have our own separate campus. We value learning in ways that kind of, push the boundaries. We value learning through experiences. So we try to provide opportunities for our kiddos to learn through experiences. A lot of different ways that can happen. The biggest one is walkabout, but we have a mini or, a week-long event in the spring. We call that interim. And we basically ask the kids, hey, don't come and sit in the classroom for that week. Instead, think about something that you want to learn that maybe you can't do in a classroom setting. Think about ways that you want to learn that you can't do here. And we provide that week off for them to be able to go out and do that. And we have other opportunities of learning through experience. One just happened yesterday. Chris Hasbrook, teacher director, invites back former Linworth students to present to our current student body about what they did on their walkabouts, what they did during their time Linworth, but more importantly, what they've been doing since they left Linworth. How sometimes unconventional paths and failures can lead to, the biggest successes. And so learning through other people's experiences are equally as important as well. So lots of opportunities to learn through experiences. We also have a focus on being in charge of our own education, or at least, being responsible or working alongside with our educators to create an experience that's going to be meaningful and valuable to the students.
How does the student get to Linworth?
That's the same question I was going to ask.
Was it? Well, you said this
so
time.
Watch
this.
Yeah, so
was it really?
That's funny. Yeah, it was. I was going to say, so if I'm an eighth grader at McCord Middle School, how do I find out about Linworth? How do I know that could be an option for me?
It starts with, the middle school staff just being pretty vocal about the options for high school. Of course, we have the two great main high schools, but there are other options for other learners. And so just being able to promote that. But then Linworth sends crews to the middle schools, and they talk about the experiences and the ways that they can learn there, and they share their stories. If students, if eighth graders are interested, or their parents, might have questions, there's a lot of opportunities to visit. And when the students and their parents visit, they get to sit in classes, they get to talk with our current community members, are asked to have a conversation with one of the teachers. And then they also have to fill out an application. We really want them to understand that Linworth, we used to be called the alternative program, and we've since changed that, obviously, to encompass this experiential factor, but it's not an alternative to school. It is still school, right? We just do things a little bit differently. So the application allows for some reflection and making sure that the kids still know that they need to show up and that they need to do school, but we just might do it in a little bit different way. So that's all a part of the process of learning about and applying to Linworth.
Sometimes the questions I get, I can't go to Linworth because I play football. I can't go to Linworth because I'm involved in swimming or whatever, drama club or whatever it is. And that's just not true.
No, right. We have all kinds of students who walk through and participate at the Linworth Experiential Program. We have athletes. We have, the STEM kids. We have theater kids. We have the band kids. Really, it's a really nice spread of different kinds of kids. We're all working towards the same goal, right? Just like creating meaningful learning experiences for those kiddos.
If I'm describing Linworth to someone, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm having a conversation with someone in the grocery store. What I appreciate about what Linworth does is the teachers there really put the kids front and center of the learning. And that happens everywhere in Worthington schools. But I say that because when I walk into a classroom, I might find a student actually teaching the class.
Sure.
And that's a little different.
Right.
Right? Like they've decided that it's important for us to learn. I have a strength in writing fiction stories, so I want to share that with the class. And teachers allow students to actually create the lesson and teach it.
Absolutely. Well, it's just another way to empower kids. The kids don't just stand up there blindly and deliver a lesson. They have to show that they're willing to do the work. Right. They're willing to do the research. So they actually do create lesson plans. They go over it with a faculty member, and they even sometimes practice teach a session or two. And honestly, Angie and Jeff, Some
cool.
of the kids, they just create the coolest stuff. They're sitting in the classes, understanding what a student needs. They have these interests, and they can just really bring some strong content. It's amazing when we empower them like that.
That's right. And Jeff, how many of those kids have you hired?
Yes, we have. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great way to
That
kind
would
of
be
build a
fascinating
program. It would be.
if you had a running list of students who actually taught classes and the percentage of those students who then went on to become teachers.
Yeah.
Because without a doubt, we've hired Linworth teachers.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I wonder if those were the same students who also taught as students
That'd
at
be
Linworth.
cool.
That'd be pretty interesting.
If they're not teaching here, they're probably teaching somewhere. Yeah,
right? And let's jump into the tradition
Yeah.
of walkabout.
Okay.
Why don't you share with us and the listeners, what is walkabout?
Walkabout is an opportunity for a student to explore something of their interests. Sometimes it's an area of interest, and other times it's just, a small curiosity or something that they might not get to do in a school setting. It happens during the second half of our seniors' school year. Up to that point, we've hopefully gotten to know them. I consider it sort of vetting them, right? They are becoming community members. They are getting their graduation requirements so that we can send them off into the community and sometimes, into the greater country and world. We typically split it up into 2 8-week sessions, but no walkabout is alike. And so they can vary even from the duration, but it typically happens in 2 8-week sessions. They are not sitting in seats at all in a classroom. So they are fully engaged during this time. We require the kiddos to get about 30 hours per week for this 8-week session. And we consider it a 50-50 service for learning exchange. So they are at these placements, sometimes with businesses, other times, organizations. Sometimes they're just traveling and exploring new cultures. When they are partnered with a mentoring organization, we focus on this 50-50 service for learning exchange. And so the kids are providing a service to the organization, and in exchange, they're learning more about their area of interest. They're not just doing that, though, because at Linworth, we obviously value experiences, but it's really in the reflection piece, so reflecting upon those experiences, is where the growth can occur. They're writing daily journals to a member of the Linworth staff, and they're really considering what they're learning during these experiences. They are fleshing out the challenges that happen daily, the challenges of spending the night, in a place that isn't their own. Right. Angie, you would have had lots of journaling.
I would
have. So they're writing reflective journals, and they're setting goals. They are earning academic credit for their experiences, obviously. And then when they come back, we get to make them think about all these pieces and then present it in these really awesome symposium presentations at the end of the year.
Why don't you highlight a student who has gone on walkabout so our listeners have an understanding from a very specific example about what walkabout is?
Okay.
Would you highlight the start to finish of what that would look like?
In the beginning of September, we sit down with the students and we ask them to consider the topics that they're interested in exploring. We also ask them to consider would they like to travel? Would they like to go somewhere other than Worthington or the Central Ohio area? But along with that comes budget too, and we have to bring that into the conversation, and as well as we have to see what the parents are willing to allow, because as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of courage that goes into sending your student somewhere else. And so oftentimes that I have to have conversations with my kids and say, what have you talked about with your parents? Let's say, Jeff, you sit down with me in the beginning of September, and you've had all these discussions with your family, and I get to know what you want to do. Then I just start reaching out to, various businesses or organizations. But let me highlight some specifics, because that's the good stuff, right? There's so many stories. Some kids know exactly what they want to do when they sit down in my office. I have a story of a current senior. She has known from the time she was 12 years old what she was going to do on Walkabout. She wants to do something in medicine, and she also wanted to do something in coral reef restoration. This young lady had the opportunity when she was 12 to go off the coast of Tahiti and watch what the group is called coral gardeners repair and restore the coral reefs there. And so she got in her mind that that's what she wanted to do. So the medicine one is a little bit easier, right? We have a couple of contacts at Nationwide Children's Hospital. So she is observing right now in the OR in various orthopedic practices. She's watching these operations on these young children, right? Just getting an understanding and being able to talk to the residents. But then also in a week, she's leaving to go to the off the coast of Honduras because we actually found an organization who is willing to take her on. She's a trained scuba diver, so she's going to be diving and actually restoring these coral reefs in the Caribbean.
That's incredible.
Really cool opportunities. But, not every kid knows exactly what they want to do. And not every kid knows if they can actually pull off the walkabout either.
You have how many students going out and where are they going? Like, give people that real broad perspective of where all your students are right now.
All right. So from any given year, we have from about 28 to 45 seniors who we're working with. So this year we have about 28 seniors, and we've got students in, I think, 7 different states and like 6 different countries. We've got students in Guatemala, Costa Rica, Canada. We've got students on their way to, like I said, Honduras, Washington, D.C., 2 students heading out to Custer State Park in South Dakota. Another student headed out to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, just simply beautiful out there.
We have a student here at the WEC.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
That's working with Toya. So, it doesn't have to be. So, for a student who's listening out there or a parent who's listening, oh, my kid's not going to, well, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Like, we have local places that
gosh.
also.
Yeah, that's good.
You can have an amazing walkabout right here locally. Let me tell you a story about a current senior. The students who are in town, they do meet with us once a week. We push them out of the school, but then we bring them back every week just to talk about their experiences. And so our current senior, who I'm going to highlight, he is Mr. Linworth. Everybody knows this kid. He engages with almost every student and every staff member. He's always, just interested in how's it going with you. And that's why he's so loved. So when we were sitting at our seminar with the seniors a couple of weeks ago, we were sharing, our highlights, things that we're learning, the things that were like our wins, and we're also sharing some of the challenges too. And so Mr. Linworth, he says, "You guys, I got to share something. I am having trouble relating to the people at my walkabout. They're treating me like an undercover cop." And so imagine this kid who is so beloved by the entire Linworth community is now, people are reserved around him. They're not sharing. They're not inviting him and welcoming him. This is kind of tough, right? He's
Absolutely.
really out of his element now. And so, the learning that's happening there. So obviously we talk to the kids and we share our various experiences, about different strategies that he can take to engage with his new staff at his walkabout. But then we also talk about hey, there are going to be circumstances where we are just not liked, and that's okay too. We can only be who we are, and we know this guy is a good guy. We know that his intentions are so good. He's just not gelling for whatever reason. We know as adults that we have those experiences.
Absolutely,
and we can get through those. And, in that same seminar session, we had another student who's local, and he shared a story where he was at Walkabout, and he's working like music production. He kind of mishandled a piece of equipment that could have been damaged, and that could have been detrimental to one of the bands that he was working with. And he kind of got busy, and then he didn't get to mention it to his mentor right away that he had maybe inappropriately handled the equipment. And he was scared that he was going to get, I don't know if he can get fired from a walkabout, but you can be asked to leave. The mentor was, very accommodating and had some conversations with him. And the student, we could tell, just felt really bad, and he didn't really know what to do in that situation. And my colleague, Amy Bowman, who is just so who I couldn't do my job without. I love the fact that we have 2 of us, but she shared a time with that student, so the whole senior class heard this too, a time where she really messed up too. And she said, sometimes we just have to apologize and then we have to deal with the consequences, but there's nothing else that you can do in that situation. So real learning and real growth can happen right here in Worthington.
Right? Yeah. Some of the hardest 2 words, I'm sorry. Right? For as easy as that sounds, that's really hard for some people.
Right.
So, our kids are learning that in their senior year in high school, I'm sorry, is going to go a long way in life.
Yeah.
I'm listening to you tell those stories, and Angie, and you're probably doing the same thing. Take yourself back to that 17 years old and having to learn at 17 that there are different personalities that you have to navigate. So he goes from the comfort of Linworth, where he is loved.
Yes.
Gets into a space where he's not known. That doesn't mean he's not going to be loved over time, but you have to learn how to navigate different personalities. Or, like all of us, we've made mistakes.
Build relationships.
And owning mistakes and communicating mistakes.
Absolutely.
And Angie, you're right. Saying out loud, I'm sorry, is not easy. But at 17 years old, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I tell you what I love about the Walkabout program is that we give them these opportunities to go out and to learn and to make the mistakes, but it's sort of with the safety net, the fact that we can talk about it, in a sort of a community supportive setting, and we can encourage each other and give each other little tips, that's the best case scenario. And so the next time when they're doing it without that support, they can call on the stuff that they've learned and heard.
What's really cool is we get to go and listen to the forum when they come back and share their experiences. And that happens when?
That happens in May. This year it's May 18th.
Okay.
And it is really one of the best days of the year because, as you said, the students come back and they worked on the things that they want to present, and they really, are reflecting on the areas of challenge and the areas of growth. And then they're also considering how these decisions and experiences are informing, next decisions, next steps. So.
And as teachers who know these kids very well, right? You have a deep relationship with these students. You have to see so much growth in them. Like they leave probably a lot like I would be scared, worried, probably not having the courage that I should have when I leave and go to Guatemala or even stay in Worthington. And do my walkabout. But when I come back, I'm walking differently when I walk in that room, and I'm standing and delivering my experience to my colleagues with a lot of pride and a lot of confidence.
Bingo. The growth is really the exciting part. It's what compels me to do it every year. I want to share a success story. We had a student several years ago, and this student wasn't necessarily in love with school. She even didn't like to show up sometimes, And when I sat down with her and we talked about what she would consider to do for walkabout if she got to walkabout, it was sort of uncertain. But she did highlight that she liked a ceramics class that she had taken. And I'm like, do you think you could show up every day if I put you in a ceramics department at a local university? And she said, I think I would really like that. We took a risk, and we put this girl in the ceramics department at Otterbein, and she showed so much growth. She wasn't in love with school, but she was in love with this hands-on learning. She was showing up every day. She was contributing. She was finding confidence in herself. And at the end of that walkabout, she decided that not only was she going to do ceramics maybe in her future, but that she was also going to enroll in college. And she did. She enrolled in Otterbein. She graduated from Otterbein. She became a contributing member of the community that she was in. She became an artist. And, sitting down with her, I remember she was even sort of shaking when we were having that initial conversation because she wasn't sure that she was going to be able to commit to a walkabout. She knew, her past, and she just really at the bottom of it, Angie, she just wasn't confident. So the walkabout allowed for that confidence to grow.
awesome.
And she just thrived as a result of that. And she was able to highlight that at the senior symposium. And she is a story that I tell all the time. Hers is the story that I tell all the time. Sometimes they don't have to necessarily be successes. A student can walk away from a walkabout and saying, you know what? I don't think I want to do that again. And I think that that's a win too. That's successful too.
Jen, when I listen to your story or your stories, what comes to mind for me is the true value you add to Worthington schools and the difference that you make for our students.
Before we transition, is there anybody in your family you want to give a shout out to? I know there's going to be some listeners in your life. This is your opportunity to talk about your family.
Yeah, so I'll say hi to my boys, all three of them, Joe, my husband, and my son Calvin and my son Desmond.
Well, we heard some great stories about Linworth Experiential and certainly appreciate, Jen, you joining us today to share those stories. But you're not off the hook yet.
Oh, boy.
So here is your opportunity in life to have a take because you're not going to be granted a pass.
All
I
right.
noticed you looking over to see in advance what some of the questions are. However, you can't read my handwriting because
I try.
I actually am struggling to read my own handwriting right now. First question is, do you prefer winter break or spring break?
Winter break.
Who was your favorite music group of all time?
Prince?
What was your first job?
I was a Block's Bagels girl.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember Block's
Block's
Bagels?
Bagels, absolutely.
So I was a bagel deli girl, and I also was a lifeguard.
This is a controversial question. What is your favorite ice cream flavor?
Ooh, I think the Graders is a black raspberry chip.
Ooh, that's a good
love
one.
that one. Yeah.
Jen, when is the last time you climbed a tree?
Like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, you guys, I have a 5, almost 6-year-old, so that is what we
You're
do.
climbing trees.
He's better at it than me.
Yeah, well, I bet.
Yeah, we've got one in our front yard, and then one down the street that they don't mind that we climb, and that's the optimal climbing tree.
If you could be a character from a movie or a book, who would you be?
Wouldn't it be fun to be Thelma and Louise?
Oh,
I mean, they.
yeah. That's actually a good one. That's a good one. That's actually a really good one. So what is your favorite cereal of all time?
So I don't eat a lot of cereal, but cereal is popular in my house.
Well, you can't have 3 guys in your house and not have
exactly
boxes of cereal
So
around.
The reigning winners right now are Lucky Charms
Oh, that's a good one.
and Frosted Flakes, but I'm Mom of the Year if I bring home Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Oh, that is a very popular one.
Like you did great breakfast, or we're on spring break breakfast. It doesn't happen all the time in my house. But
Ask your boys when you get home about how they feel about Fruity Pebbles. Thanks for playing along.
oh my gosh.
And thanks for being here
So
today,
much fun.
seriously.
Yeah, thank you. This was a blast. You guys do a good job.
Yep, it's a good interview. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your story with us, Jen. And again, for those of you that are thinking about Linworth, check out the Worthington Schools website and click on the Linworth website and reach out. They have lots to share with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Jen.
Woohoo.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Worth the Journey podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, our Worthington Schools website, or wherever you get your podcasts. A big thanks to Corey Carter and our communications team for making this podcast a reality. And of course, to our students at The Ohio State University in the communications department. The journey may not always be easy, but it'll definitely be worth it. Thanks for taking care of each other and have a great day out there.